Hello, welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events in which we explore the underlying connections and root causes that help us discover what is really true and can even help reshape the focus of our lives. Today we're going to discuss a few different things, some difficult situations, and we'll see where we go from there. I'm going to have to get used to holding this mic closer to my chin. It bumped it a couple times when I was reading, and it made me pause, but overwhelming feedback. Mike, hold the mic closer to your face when you talk. Well, we've been gone for a couple weeks, and partly you were in Africa, and so we'll have to get your little recap of that. But also, you guys had a change in your life and some difficult news, and we're gonna talk about it a little bit today.
Sure. Yeah.
Is that how you think of it? Or
we found out that my wife has breast cancer. We're still in this weird phase where they don't know how serious it is yet. They know there's going to be some surgery and some radiation, but there's biopsies and scans and checking of different lymph nodes in the liver and other places that cancer tends to go from there, and then that tells us if it's stage 1 or 2, or if it's stage 4. And it's it's been a bit of a roller coaster for the last couple of weeks because we found out right before my trip to Africa, and we talked about canceling it. But because we didn't know a lot, and it's been several weeks, we still don't know the extent of it completely. It seemed like it was a good time to just go over there, and she has a lot of family in the area, sisters and her mom, who can go to doctor's appointments with her in that week that I was gone. And the nice thing was I could be, even the most remote parts of Africa that I was in, which I certainly wasn't in the most by any means, but places without electricity, places without a indoor plumbing, but you can still get cell service. We could still FaceTime and check in. So I was able to talk with her quite a bit.
Yeah.
But it's just been a process, too, of figuring out the role of faith in that. I don't know. I struggle with maybe not having as many emotions on the surface as maybe I have underneath. And so trying to figure out if I'm accepting these things as they come based on my faith, trusting God, or if I'm just in denial about it.
Yeah.
Because you can accept it on its surface, but the emotional impact of it maybe doesn't hit.
Yes.
The same, so.
Yeah. So we talked just a minute off screen before we started here about doing this, and I didn't say much because I wanted to ask you some things kind of live, in a sense, because I think it is important. On Second Thought is what we've named our podcast, because we want to reconsider things, and the reality is it's a lot easier to reconsider things about other people's lives than our own. It's easier to consider ideas than it is about things that affect us so directly. And it's also, it just feels, not wrong is not the right word, but sacred. It feels a violation of the sacred if we just jump into, let's say the Trump indictment. That's the hot thing, right? Yeah. There's a couple others. It's almost a violation of the sacred because you have this thing that God intruded into your life. It's bigger than that. For you, our nation, not many people are affected by you and Nicole, but by Trump. But that's not what we're talking about. Your life, and it's significant. There's something sacred going on.
The more personal that you can get, I think. This is my belief about this sort of media platform, is that when we get really specific, it actually becomes more broadly applicable. I have a friend who's a writer and a poet, and he talks about how the more detailed you can be, about the texture of the fabric on the shoulder of the character that you zero in on it, and suddenly it becomes, it changes the moment into something everybody can connect with.
Yeah.
And if we just talk about broad things or big ideas, and we don't zoom in and face the reality of it,
there's a conundrum with that, though, too, because So I've done a lot of preaching over my life, having been a pastor for a number of years, and probably there's a few sermons that I've gotten quite a bit of good feedback over. One of them was when I preached on depression and the Psalms and David, and I just pulled out of there our current language of depression for what we look at as biblical language of David in the Psalms.
Yeah.
But I used myself a lot, and I got all this feedback. Oh, so great to hear, your own personal thing. It made it alive, right?
Right.
But the conundrum is this. It's not about me, right? You go up there and you think you don't want to talk about a topic and make it all about yourself.
Right.
I've heard other preachers, I think of them as story preachers. They're always telling stories.
Yeah.
And the best stories are in their own life.
Yeah.
Then they start to repeat because they don't remember.
You
It's
hear the
tough
same
to.
story. Yeah.
But so how do we, I've thought about this when I've thought about talking with you about this, and how do you talk about this and ask you a bunch of questions without, does it make you feel uncomfortable, like all of a sudden the camera's on you, so to speak? The spotlight's on you. And at some point, it's on you a lot because this is a big thing.
I don't feel uncomfortable. I mean, I've put cameras on myself for the last several years pretty regularly.
That's true, but yeah.
In some ways it does feel more vulnerable,
Yeah.
but it also, and maybe this is the same thing I'm saying, is that part of what I feel like my role is with my wife is that I'm the reliable, she said a word yesterday on her way back from the hospital. It's not stoic, right? But it's like I can be the one she leans on.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to have a large emotional reaction.
Yeah.
I will
On the surface.
Yeah, and it's not as if I feel as though I'm holding something underwater.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when the emotions come, they will, and they have at different times. But yeah, I feel like my calling is not to be a private person.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that. I think that's the call of leadership. To be a leader means to be vulnerable in front of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that comes with costs, obviously.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say it that way. While being a pastor over a number of years, I've thought about it at different times and had reflections and sometimes talked with other people and whatnot. But one of the things I've toyed with is this idea that pastoring is simply living out in front of everyone.
It is. Yeah.
And the biggest thing is this: you're called, and the reason you dig around inside yourself and learn, because people watch you, and you have to live your life of faith, and you have to live your life of fear, and you have to live your life of repentance, and you have to live your life of sorrow and joy. And at times it feels like it sucks because it's so open, but that is exactly what it is people watch you navigate these waters. They're navigating the same ones, but there's no spotlight on them. And so you're holding up a mirror with failures and successes.
Yeah.
Right? David's called a man after God's own heart. And we think of him with the great sin of Bathsheba. And yet Psalm 51 is a psalm of repentance, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not so much that failures define us even when they come, but that how we handle them is also public and seen. And so I do think that about this kind of situation, but it's very hard to, in a sense, push that on somebody else, as I thought about you and I talking. And I know it wouldn't be pushing, but that's interesting similarity.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have faced my own insecurities. Usually it's around, do I have what it takes to go through or to lead situations, maybe it's focused on wisdom and what to say and not say. But the other side of it is, I think the call to be outspoken, right?
Mm-hmm.
In particular, that form of leadership that we're trying to undertake requires, in my mind, that if we're going to say that our way of looking at things is the right way, that we've got,
there's some truth in it,
that it's universally applicable across cultures and times, because it comes from God, the Creator.
Mm-hmm.
Then if it doesn't work when we live it out,
right,
something's wrong.
I agree.
And I'm a firm believer in that. That if my religion is not working, then something's wrong with my religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so it needs to work in my marriage. It needs to work in good times and bad times, right?
Or in particular.
And it doesn't mean it's going to feel good.
That's
I'm
right.
not saying that
Doesn't
that
at all.
means I always succeed either, or that I'll be the most, the happiest or the most wealthy. There's so many variables to it. But, if God says that we are going to be overcomers, then it better be happening. And so in that sense, if I'm hiding or pretending, then I'm not leading anymore. It's not the same.
It's interesting when I was thinking about talking with you because you were gone for a week and I've known about this, and then we interacted briefly, and I've just thought through different things, and then I thought, what if it was I was in
How
your
would you respond?
Yep.
Sure.
How would I respond? And what I found interesting is pride is not the right word, but pride comes into it. Okay, what I wanted to talk to you and the way I wanted to treat you, in many respects, not with kids' gloves is not the right way. Gently, let's say this, very gently.
Yeah.
There's an appropriateness to that, I think. However, when I thought, but the tendency, at least my tendency, would have been, and still is actually, so gentle, very fearful or concerned to not wound you or Nicole, right?
Sure.
When you dig around inside things, there's hurt places. You poke bruises, so to speak.
Yeah.
However, when I thought about if it was me, I would want to have this displayed, even if it was uncomfortable, and I would want somebody else, even if they poked where it hurt, I'd be okay saying, ow, not there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what I saw is that, I need to give Luke the same opportunity to have the same response that I would want to have. And that is, yeah, this is horrible, but we should talk about this, even if it looks messy, because that's what we are as Christians.
Yeah.
And,
Well, it's interesting too because there's an expectation, I think, of tenderness. I've had a couple different people come and give me like long hugs.
yes, yeah.
And I'm in the
I
midst
gave
of this hug,
Nicole a hug on Sunday. I think it's probably the first time.
and I was getting this hug.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this is a longer hug than normal.
Yeah,
I'm thinking, are they waiting for a breakdown?
I know.
Like, are they
I know.
hoping?
I
It's
know.
not hoping.
I know.
It's not. There's nothing malicious about it.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's a mode I have to be in to function in a normal way.
Yeah.
And I'm not hoping that when I go to church that I become this incredibly vulnerable. Like I go to church
Yeah.
to go to work,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get the kids' church thing going,
Right.
to help where help is needed. And in those places, that's a really important and fulfilling work to do.
Yeah.
But even in intimate moments here, it's not. I'm not looking for comfort. I
Yeah.
guess. Does that make sense?
It does. But again, I think this is a double-edged sword too. So I've had the opportunity and the privilege of doing a lot of funerals,
Yeah.
which I personally enjoy. And it's because it's this same
Well,
kind
the
of
funeral
thing.
is the place for that.
Oh my goodness. It's a very sacred moment that
Yeah.
calls upon a tremendous amount of compassion and faith that is bold to have hope, right? There's these
Yeah.
double dynamic. Now, what I've noticed in funerals, and I don't know that you can stop it, but I want to be aware of it. And it's this: at the funeral, people are incredibly caring and compassionate, and they should be.
Yeah.
And it's very touching and moving to this family that has suffered loss. But afterwards, the people are all gone.
Right.
Yeah, the funeral takes 2 hours, maybe a day or 2 days if you think of all the prep and the communication. And then what I've experienced, because lots of times people have been in the different churches I've been, then they're incredibly lonely. Then it hurts more. And actually, sometimes they get angry and they get mad at the people at their funeral because they're really caring then, but they've not talked to them since then. So they have this desire to be comforted, but not too much.
Right.
But then when it's gone, it still hurts to be alone.
Well, and I think that's where just having friends that are in your life regularly.
I agree with you.
There's nothing, because if people aren't in your life, they don't know when.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't know either.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I
And
do.
the other side of it is I'm not in mourning.
Yeah,
Like she's not dead.
right. Right.
And even the chance that she might die is real, but it's not huge.
yeah.
And so, and And my personality generally is that when things are difficult or when I just want time alone, facts and concepts are where I go.
Yeah, for good and bad, probably.
Sure. And so
Yeah.
so I've got the statistics. I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
the percent chance we're at. I share some of that with her. Some of
Yeah.
it's helpful, some of it's not.
Yeah.
You know, different and there's a lot of questions still. And so I'm pretty good, I think, at saying, okay, we don't have the answer. We don't know that it's stage 4. So why would I have the emotions of stage 4?
That's right.
Right?
That's right. But that
we'll
is a
face
fear
that when it
pattern
comes.
that we have. People do that on purpose. Well, let me treat it as if the worst so I won't be, surprised. And so
Sure.
they'll live as if it's stage 4 now. So they say they're protecting themselves, insulating themselves from, an expectation or a bad
yeah,
thing.
but so the other side of that is, and you mentioned the word trauma, which it definitely is not trauma,
Right.
because trauma is when highly emotional and negative events take on a pattern of repeating in your heart, and you keep reliving them until you get in this groove of
Okay.
experiencing just as intense and negative emotions as you did when that happened.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? And that
Right.
becomes a trauma,
Sure.
which is why some people can take something that seems mundane and turn it into a trauma by
Yeah. They relive
focusing
it.
on it over and over and over.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing my life for the most part. Usually it's when I'm trying to go to sleep that it's harder, right? Because your brain is sort of starting to shut down in, and now the compartments bleed over.
Yeah. Dreams.
But living through a normal day, what I find and what I'm doing is saying, like, okay, in this compartment, in this box, is the potential of my wife's death.
Yeah.
And so I know that it's there, and there's going to be a time where that potential might get real.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in there.
Peak.
Yep. And then I'm going to close it again.
Yeah.
Right? And every little bit I'm going to be like, okay, do I really know what it looks like in there? I'm going to look, but I'm not going to go in there.
Right.
That's not going to help anybody.
No.
And helping is what my role is right now.
That's interesting to say it that way because, in a sense, you're preparing yourself for the potential of taking the lid off that box.
Yeah.
Because it's unwise to be completely stunned and shocked, but there's no reason to take it off.
That's right. Yeah. Or to reach
That's
in there.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so Piper has this sentence. I don't remember if he wrote a book on it or if it was just a sermon he did, but he said this: "Don't waste your cancer." That was the title of either a book or a sermon. I don't
Okay.
remember. Don't
That's
waste
John
your
Piper,
John Piper, yeah.
retired pastor of somewhere.
Yeah,
in
don't waste
Minnesota.
your cancer. Which I liked that phrase because it's out in the open.
Yeah.
And it asks for an element of faith. It asks to peek in the box without living there.
Yeah.
It asks for an element of faith in the midst of something bad.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like my role as a husband is to ask God to heal her.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Teach me to heal. The Bible uses the phrase of the person doing the miracle is doing the miracle. I've heard a lot of people say, "Well, it wasn't the preacher that healed. It was God."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, but the Bible doesn't use those kind of language. It says Paul healed, Jesus healed, Peter healed, John healed. So there's something for us to learn, and you see there's a story of Jesus coming down off the Mount of Transfiguration. There's a dad there with a kid who a demon is trying to kill this kid over the course of years, throwing him into water, throwing him into fire. And the apostles who did not go up the mountain with Jesus, the ones who stayed down to minister, couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, well, it only comes out through
And
prayer.
they had handled others.
They had done, that's right.
yeah.
They'd had a very successful
So
ministry.
they felt confident at the start.
So there would seem then to be different spiritual maladies or battles, maybe you could say, that require more strength. So what's the strength that I have? What's the portion I've received from God to do anything of a spiritually significant impact?
Yeah.
And if this, if don't waste the cancer means it's time to seek God to do more, let's do it.
It could mean a lot of things,
Yeah.
right? Don't waste your cancer. Could probably, I might view it one way and you might view it another, right?
Sure.
So, tell me about. Okay, I'm fighting in my mind, speaking for an audience, and it's like, no, don't do that. That's not how we've done this.
Right.
You and I have just talked.
Yeah.
We've just let people listen in. We're not like talking for them.
There's only 20 people listening in.
Yeah, whatever. But so don't do it that way. Actually, just talk to you. And yet I'm also aware of the things that people. Okay, so healing.
Yeah.
I know that people have prayed for you. There've been prayer meetings and
Mhm.
whatnot. How do you? Let me phrase it in this way. So you and I grew up in different sectors of the church.
Yeah.
I grew up that believed certain gifts had ceased to function after the apostolic age.
Yeah.
Now I changed my mind on that. It was a long process. It was an uncomfortable process, but I changed my mind. But it doesn't undo. You can change your mind about something. So I would say I'm more probably where you grew up. But when you don't grow up and live with it, it's still uncomfortable.
theoretical.
It is theoretical. Yes.
Yeah. Even me growing up with it, I grew up with it as a testimonies that you hear.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean. I mean, I've had little moments
Yeah.
of the miraculous.
Yeah.
I remember in college, I was just seeking God like crazy over this course of a year and a half, like reading the Bible an hour every day, really trying to understand what Christianity is, how God wants us to connect with Him,
Yeah.
and wanting to do miracles. And we would do times where we would just pray for each other. A bunch of guys get
Yeah.
together. We put somebody in the middle. We're all going to pray for him now, and then we'll take turns.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to hear in your spirit, what does God want me to pray? And I would get to this point where it was like, I'm not even going to say anything until I feel
Yeah.
what God wants me to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels like I'm wasting my breath, right?
Yeah.
So one time, one of the friends, one of his roommates, he says, "Hey, I got this head cold thing. I think he had a job interview or a play. He was in a play, maybe. I don't remember. He needed this cold to go away. So we're praying for him, and I'm doing that. Like, God, what do you want me to say? And I had this picture flood into my head of Moses parting the Red Sea, and the idea of that was it's not just a story. It was physical water that physically moved,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like God gave Moses an encouraging thing to tell the people of Israel.
Right.
They needed the water to move
Yeah.
so they wouldn't die. And it was like, okay, it was just this sudden rush of like, this is real. God wants to really do something. And we prayed, and I prayed that out loud. And he was healed immediately of a cold. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So,
right.
But then you see cancer, or you hear stories of more serious ailments, and you think, okay, if that feels like I graduated kindergarten, congratulations,
Right.
So now looking at it, I think, okay, what kind of fasting, what kind of seeking of God am I willing to do? Because there's such an urge to just say, well, God will do what he wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, when I read the Bible, I don't see people doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I see people taking action to, even when you see, what's the story? Peter goes and there's a woman whose name I can't remember. She had died. And they all sort of came and said, would you pray for her? Which is really strange. You don't often see in the Bible. Maybe so. Because she sewn garments. They were showing how she serves the church and things. You don't often see the crowd expecting healing they'll do, but not raising from the dead. They seem to be even thinking that. And the way it tells the story, and this is how I learned it from other things too, is Peter doesn't go and ask God to raise her from the dead. But instead, he says he knelt down and prayed. Then he got up and said, arise.
Mm.
And so it's like, okay, the prayer is to figure out what God wants to do.
Mm.
So if you're going to heal, you need someone with the gift from God to heal. Someone who's been trained or who's spent the time in prayer. I don't know what it is, right? Like Jesus describes this issue, you need to be fit. You need to be spiritually fit or capable. I don't know what it is. So you need someone who's gifted to do this thing by God. You need God to want to do it. And then you need some level of faith in the community. Like you see sometimes Jesus couldn't do miracles, and he's obviously gifted and obviously has all the faith he needs, but he couldn't. So I don't know if the faith of the community affects God's willingness, or if there's some other spiritual impact.
Yeah, you're talking about Jesus in Nazareth, for example.
Right,
He
in his
could not
hometown.
do many
Yeah.
miracles.
So I'm trying to put all this together and say, okay, what is God asking me as the authority he's given me as her husband to speak life over her physical body? Obviously, he can do what he wants at any time,
Yeah.
but he's given us this role. And I feel like when I was teaching my sons to tie their shoes, like I can tell him all I want, but he's got to put his fingers on the strings and work on it. And then his fingers will learn it.
I think that's right. One of the things I learned when I was changing my mind on this topic, I was working with an Assembly of God ordained guy, and we would talk about this quite a bit and whatnot. We were praying once and about somebody and healing whatnot. And when we were done, he said, "You know what's interesting?" He said, and he says, "You Baptists," and it was not a bad thing. It was the Baptist side, and he's on the Pentecostal, and he goes, "You guys pray for healing like a shotgun. You throw out as many pebbles as you think are biblical, as many pellets. We tend to pray more like a single lead bullet that's going to get it done if it's the right one, if it hits."
What was this? Who
Assembly
was
of God.
Assemblies of God. Okay.
Yeah, Pentecostal.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I can hear that. I can hear that in the prayers. Because you just said even the phrase, God can do what he wants. And this is the dilemma. The scripture lays out a wide range of things that God's after. And we really don't often know until he does. But that doesn't mean we're not called to seek something.
Yeah.
And so what happens, I think, in the circles I've been involved with, because of those options, then we simply don't ask enough for healing. And I came to the conclusion that if you don't ask, you won't receive.
Right.
Occasionally, God gives it when there's no asking, but by and large, one of the reasons there's more healing in Pentecostal and charismatic circles is partly because they ask more.
Just asking more.
They ask
Yeah.
more. They put their hands on the shoe laces.
Well, this is the big Bethel. In fact, when we went to Asbury, the first night we were there, we met a woman and her mom, who had just come out of the meeting, and we were preparing to go in. We saw them at Subway and started chatting. The daughter had been trained through Bethel in their school of supernatural ministry, and their foundational, I'd say, theology about it is that when Jesus went places and healed everybody, then it would seem that's God's will that everyone be healed. And when he couldn't, it wasn't that he couldn't because he didn't want to. He couldn't because something was wrong. But again, that would still seem to reflect that God's desire is that everyone be healed. I pushed back. You've got a couple of clear examples.
I
Job
think so too.
and the Apostle Paul. So Job obviously is afflicted, but he's a righteous man. He's a godly man who's well established. And it would seem that there are moments God tests, right? When Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh,
Yeah.
which the Bethel folks explain away to not be physical,
Yes.
obviously,
Yeah.
but it would seem really clearly that it is. But even then, he says that God is teaching him something.
Yeah.
He's saying, "My grace is sufficient."
That's
So-
what John
so-
Wimber did, because he died of cancer.
Okay.
Starting the Vineyard movement and healing in the 70s. And lots of things happened.
Sure.
And he got cancer and he prayed and
Well, and the Bill Johnson, who I appreciate his ministry. He's the founding kind of influential pastor of Bethel. His wife just died of cancer,
yeah.
but she's older. And
Yeah.
the fact is, everyone who's ever been healed of everything
That's
is
right.
still dead.
That's right. Lazarus died. Even
Lazarus
after-
died.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're not creating heaven on earth. We're just opening a window to see it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do.
And that's what healing's meant to be.
Yeah.
Healing is meant to be a sign that Jesus is coming back.
Yes.
You can't
That's what
make
I think
Jesus
also.
come back now.
That's why I didn't know. I'm glad you went where you did. I probably wouldn't have said this if you hadn't, just because this is not a moment for me to disagree with you. But
Yes, it is. Come on.
well, to choose when it's important enough, because the topic is big.
Yeah.
But I don't agree with the Bethel perspective that God wants everybody healed. I think that, like you said, healings are little brief moments of this is the kingdom, and this is what in general we're after. I'm going to give you pictures of it,
Yeah.
and I'm going to let you know that I'm doing things. I'm on the move. Now, what he is after, what I do think is biblical, is he wants to heal the soul of every individual. He wants them to come to faith. He wants them to be remade new. And so he's going to give continuing pictures of, I'm going to regenerate this body thing. I'm going to break the laws of nature, so to speak, step in and to show you my power. But this is where we're aiming by and large. And the physical fall, the physicality of the fall and disease and whatnot, I'm only pushing back against it partially. That's going to come for the end when I abolish this rotten curse.
Yeah.
But for now, the main gates of hell kind of thing is the shackled soul.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you see, because I was thinking about this actually just the other day. I was talking on Facebook with someone about mental illness. You know, obviously the shooting in Nashville of the
Right.
kids and the
Yeah.
teachers at,
Yeah.
at the Christian school by someone who had a clear anti-Christ agenda,
Yeah.
you know, whose social perspective was very influenced by the left and critical gender theory, and seemed to be expressing some desire to not be a woman anymore.
Yeah.
A former student, there's some personal
Yeah.
vendetta.
Yeah. Right.
It came out that the pastor was counseling her actively,
Yeah.
and he killed her daughter. Well, she killed his
Yeah,
daughter,
right.
rather. So anyway, in the midst of all that, the question of, well, what does the gospel, what do we offer as Christians, as church, as ministers? What do we offer to people when it comes to
Yeah.
schizophrenia
Yeah.
or all these other mental illnesses that people kind of feel like you send them to the doctor because what can we do,
Right.
right?
Right.
And counselors are even trained. You know,
Yeah.
you're in over your head. You
Yeah.
need professional care.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My wife had an acquaintance who was struggling with self-harm and eating disorders.
Right.
She couldn't even find a counselor
Yeah.
who would address it. It's like
Yeah.
there just isn't,
Right.
if people feel outgunned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, okay, in this, I firmly believe that there's a spiritual component.
Yes. I
To
know.
mental illness.
That's why I agree.
I wouldn't, you know, there actually the whole chemical imbalance as an explanation is even come into question, but that doesn't mean that some people aren't really helped by some of these therapeutic, you know, pharmaceuticals. Some people definitely aren't. But even the whole concept of pharmaceuticals, you know, historically are part of a spiritual.
Yes.
You know, you take drugs to
Yeah.
encounter spiritual beings.
Yeah.
And that's still the case, and you're seeing more of that.
The body and the mind are intertwined.
Sure.
You can't just, our secular culture wants to disengage the realm of spirit as if they can approach everything through the realm of body. And that's false.
Right, but so we're not promising that everybody's body can be healed, but we
No.
do, for some reason, promise.
Well,
I mean, I think I understand it, but you know what I'm saying? It feels like, why are we separating the body from the healing the heart, as I think is what you were saying.
yes. So when I said healing the heart, I would probably, if we're depending on what pathway we're going to walk down, I'd probably step back and redefine it. I think there's a healing of the heart that comes with faith in Jesus and has a fundamental change of the heart. It's made new. But I don't think that means that, let's say I struggle with anger, and let's say another person struggles with pornography, and another person struggles with lust, and I didn't mean lust, overeating, let's say.
Okay,
I just wanted to put three out there that are common.
sure.
When you come to Jesus in faith, I think the back of those things, in a sense, can get broken, but it doesn't mean that they get erased and eradicated. I think they'll be your battleground that you have to keep fighting in.
The back of those things. You're saying that
Yeah.
the strength of the temptation.
Or not so much the temptation as the spiritual illness. So what I look at the cross as doing is it has nailed the list of offenses, and in the spiritual realm there has been a complete victory,
Yeah,
but it is working itself out in our world,
sure.
and it is incomplete. And God, So Hebrews 2, not yet, we do not yet see everything under his feet. Everything's been put under his feet, but
Right.
we don't yet see. So I take that to mean that in the realm of healing, even of the heart, and I'm talking about heart, not just like emotions, but of the soul kind of idea. When we become Christians, there's a fundamental shift. We're made new.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the cancer spiritually, the leprosy, that would be the biblical
Yeah.
imagery. You may get healed of leprosy, but you might not have a nose still because it rotted and fell off, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
It doesn't just go away, but that doesn't mean that God can't make it go away. There are people who
And that has happened.
were,
Sure.
that's right, anger, overeating, and pornography. All three of those, you can find stories everywhere where they disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
The person was fundamentally never the same again. Great, but that's not the most common experience.
Right.
So I think that healing on the inside is also a partial process that God raises his hand to see and says, see, trust me.
Well, and I think there's, like I was saying earlier about tying the shoes, I think there's a role God's given us to wage spiritual war.
I agree. Yeah.
To apply
That's
his
right.
authority in those areas.
And to fight in them. Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
the ministry commonly called deliverance or exorcism.
Yeah.
That's what that's about.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a scary movie
Yeah.
kind of exorcism for someone to be afflicted or
Yeah.
tormented or just haunted in their heart with
Yeah.
lies that
Yeah.
are not from God.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about the phrase, don't waste your cancer,
Yeah.
which I've had that in my head for 10 years since I heard it. And I thought it was a brilliant phrase. Your box to peek in. What do you think about the idea? How has it affected you in terms of this? The reality is, okay, so Melissa and I, we're going to die.
Yeah.
There is no getting away from it. We may never get cancer and have the threat to us for what we would call statistically premature.
Yeah. Right.
But it's not, we can't stop it.
It's going to happen.
I'm wondering if one of the don't waste things is you are given, okay, and so I'm going to say this word, but I'm going to cringe when I say it. I'm going to tell you up front I'm cringing. But I believe in the word, but it's a hard word.
Okay.
You're given the opportunity to see something earlier but it's the same thing that we all are going to have to face anyway. And
Well,
in
and
that,
it's all
there's a
expectations.
good
Yeah.
in the sense that what forces you to see your mortality is a gift from God. Can
Well,
I
and
say it that way?
You know, if you're 85 and your wife
Yes.
is, and one of you passes away, the part of the solace of that is I
Yes.
don't have long on the earth either.
Yes.
And so the prospect of being alone for just a few more years is not the
Yes.
same
That's right.
as to say, well, wait, am I building a whole new life? Like, what am I
Mhm.
doing now? And I've got such a long road still ahead.
And at 85, she would be 4 or 5 years over so she's already on borrowed time.
Yeah.
And you think, well, okay, she
Which
had a
on
good
some level
run.
is an expectation that we just
It
carry,
is
right?
expectation.
Um,
It's not unreasonable either.
So the picture I think of is, and looking when you were describing again, you know, looking in the box, is of a UFC fighter. Okay, so when these guys, for the most part, they don't fight. They certainly don't fight every week. Sometimes they might only fight 2 times a year,
Mm,
but they'll get weeks notice, usually
yes.
many weeks in
Right.
advance, and they'll
That's
say,
right.
okay, we're going to do a camp
Yep.
to train,
Yep.
to prepare for one particular opponent.
Yes.
We're going to watch how he fights.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
he likes to duck left when he goes right, you know,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's what I feel like I'm in.
Yes. I
It's
like that.
Okay, we got this fight. It's coming.
Yep.
It's not real yet, but it's
Yep.
coming.
Okay. So, partly reason why I like that. So, I have type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
Statistically, I'm going to die before another person would. All the other things the same with me.
Yeah.
Okay. My wife doesn't like it when I talk about this, but it's just the reality.
Sure.
So one of my goals is to reach the age of 70. That's way below the average for a man. I think it's 78 right now.
Is it below average for someone with diabetes?
No, it isn't.
Okay.
I'd be fortunate to reach 70.
Wow, I didn't know
Yeah.
it was that significant.
Yeah, yes. I just had a friend who died at 50 something years old and had diabetes about the same amount
But
of
does
time
he
as me.
die from complications of diabetes?
Yep.
He does.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's, yeah. So, what that's done to me though is I've thought about this a lot. It's the fight. I
Yeah.
am in prep,
Yeah.
and I notice when I interact with my wife, she doesn't want. Let me say it carefully because she's probably gonna hear this. It makes her uncomfortable. She gets upset with me a little bit, and probably
you're
in
opening the box.
I'm
She doesn't
opening the
wanna look in
box. That's right.
Yeah.
And she doesn't necessarily have a reason to look in there.
Right.
There's no thing that's pressed upon her. Though I tease her, we can tease about. I was thinking about this. Are we gonna have a podcast? Our jocularity is on the low, and that's understandable.
Yeah.
But it's okay to smile, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It's okay. So
it's important.
it is important. I know. I was going to ask you about that later, but so I tease her, and because she grows up in the Tri-Cities near Hanford, where they did atomic bomb work, and if you come from the Tri-Cities, they're very self-defensive about cancer. They act like but there's a lot of cancer.
Is there?
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
statistically way more, but they don't want to admit that. So I tease her about drinking the water in the country, right? And what do you think? What do you think you're going to die of?
Right.
I mean, actually, the odds are it's going to be cancer. It might not be, but
Yeah.
and I'm kind of joking a little bit. But what I'm actually trying to do, I'm forced personally to peek in that box.
Yeah.
I can't not.
Well, you can.
I can, but it would be unhealthy.
Right.
And I'm trying to, and if I'm going to do that, I'm kind of dragging my wife along for the journey.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of poking at her, just saying, you could have a little reason to look in that box yourself.
Right.
Do you think that's healthy? Do you think God means for us to be looking in that box more than we do?
Then yeah. Well, part of it too is we've constructed our civilization in such a way that we don't have to face death.
Currently,
Yeah.
especially.
Even
You're right.
when someone is dying, we get them away from us.
I know
We
it.
send them to the hospital.
Very few open caskets
Once
these
they're
days.
dead, we keep them away.
That's right.
Yeah, and then when they die, we get them right to the
That's right.
oven and burn
And
up and get
we
those
would-
ashes away.
We
and-
could be accused of, and I've actually heard Christians, child abuse, to have your kid look at the. I've been to a few funerals and they had an open casket. One of them in particular, their young boy died. They said they wanted an open casket, and they were fierce, and it was of faith.
Yeah.
And they won it because they said, we need to see it, and all his friends need to see it, because that's our end.
If death is more real, then sin is more real,
That's right.
and salvation is more precious.
That's right.
So
I
yeah,
completely
absolutely.
agree. The problem is, it really just stinks.
Yeah.
For especially then if God. So I've thought about this with
Well,
diabetes.
there's no amount of political wrangling that can solve it.
No, there isn't.
I saw someone say recently, how to disarm the church. One, you convince them not to talk about political things, and then two, you make everything political. But so anything that's not political, it's like we've pushed it away. Like
Yes.
I can't control her cancer. I can't control if someone dies, and therefore I got to get it out of my life because I only want things in my life that I can control.
Yes. Oh, that's an interesting take. What I'm hearing you say is the politicization, part of the reason we have it today and it's seeping everywhere is because it is controllable in a sense.
It's a fight for control, right? Who's going to make these decisions?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point.
Which is a sure sign of dysfunction, personal and social.
Yeah, a
think the fight for
worldview askew,
power.
right?
Yeah.
Well, so I've thought about this. What are the things that have made for we have certain ways in which our world has improved. Technology has done some things, but at the more important levels, we've seemed to be sliding backwards. And one of the things I've thought is about this idea of death. We are shielded from death and pain also in a way that prior generations know we are more shielded from pain and death than at any time in human history.
But it was
And
a
it has
Christian
not been
impulse to
good
do
for
that,
us. I know.
right? Because death is not good. We want
Right.
life.
And hospitals, our missionaries started hospitals.
Yeah. And so it's almost like our success has made us soft.
I
But
have
part of the reason that your success would make you soft is because you'd stop advancing. So it's a lot easier to go all in on a poker game if you've
Oh,
only got
okay.
10 bucks.
Wait. Stop advancing on the very things like palliative care or that kind of thing. Stop
Well, or
advancing or
just-
technology,
or
do you
that
mean?
we've turned inward,
Okay.
right? So it's easy to say, and this is where empires are born, because it's like, okay, we've got to keep advancing, and therefore we're going to keep innovating.
Mm-hmm.
But to the point where you say, I've made my millions, let's sit back, build barns, and be comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
is the point when it makes you soft.
Mm.
And God, Jesus
I
speaks
was-
to that specifically.
Okay, I hear what you're saying there. I was thinking of it differently when you said stop advancing. I was looking at the negative side.
Mm.
So I have this little theory that what happens, it applies to our lives, to nations. We become a Christian, let's say, and your life was a mess before that.
Yeah.
It was horrible. You become a Christian and God cleans a bunch of things up and you're a different person.
Right.
But then you start protecting those things. And then you start becoming a little self-righteous. And then you can't admit your sins and problems. And then something bad happens and you're totally caught off guard and you can't deal with it. And you think God can't forgive you as if you're any worse than you were the first, at the first. And so my theory is that things get better because of the gospel. And then we live in the betterness without the gospel.
Right.
And
I think that's the
then-
same thing.
Yes, I
stop
agree. I
advancing.
think it's the exact same. Okay, stop advancing. But
So
it's
the
the
difference
negative
between
side.
settlers and pioneers. Have you ever heard that metaphor?
Mm-hmm.
Because what the settlers do is they make roads real straight. They
Yeah.
make rules for everything.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to follow the according to the manners
Mm-hmm.
of society.
Right.
But they're not advancing anymore.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes just who followed the rules right.
Yeah.
And now you're just moralizing.
And then what you're saying then is that there's a certain health in the pioneers that gets lost amongst the settlers. A certain kind of healthy vigorousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I think.
Because in testing, this is actually an educational thing too, that kids will learn as much or more from a lesson because there's a test.
Mm.
If you take away the test, they actually learn less.
Mm.
Because the process of feeling tested, it brings it back up. And now you learn it on a deeper level.
Interesting.
It's sort of like when you have the kids teach each other.
Yeah.
And the kid who says, "Oh, I already know it, and now you're just making me teach it. Why don't you teach it? You're the teacher."
Yeah.
Right? I've had kids
Yeah.
say that. But the act of them teaching their neighbor actually creates a deeper level of learning.
Right. Right.
And so, we've got this success, America does, and now we've become decadent rather than
Right.
saying, "What else could
Exactly.
we do?
Exactly.
How else could we
Yes.
serve?"
Okay. Yes, that's the merging there of not progressing. There's
From
a
decadence
good,
to debauchery,
Yeah, I agree with that.
from debauchery to depravity.
So, let me ask you this question: Have you wrestled this? And then I'm going to ask you a different set of questions, but this will be my last one in a sense here. Chastisement. Do you think about that? Have you thought about that? Here's something difficult coming
Do I
in
think
life.
that this cancer
The whole
could somehow
Hebrews
be
12, yeah. All right, I wouldn't use the word punishment because it's controversial, and we'd have to get into other ideas. But whatever Hebrews 12 means,
Remind me about Hebrews 12.
He chastens your sons if he chastens you,
Yeah.
and those he doesn't chasten, they're not sons,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes people struggle with. There's a range of responses
Okay.
within the topic of a difficult thing that's painful and chastisement, that God is either angry with me or that God is disciplining me. There can be some negative aspects, there can be some positive. I wondered if you thought about that.
It hasn't crossed my mind. I think of my time when I was a wrestling coach, I was a young man when I first started teaching. I was an assistant coach of a high school team.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't enjoy it particularly. I'd been a wrestler in high school. I didn't enjoy being a wrestler.
Mm.
But they needed a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually thought, okay, fine, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned a lot about coaching and about being a leader,
Mm-hmm.
actually. And I really value the lessons I learned.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this moment, I've talked about it often, where we had a kid, his name was Pat, and he was a freshman. And he was pretty good, but squirrely, immature, and funny kid.
Yeah.
Little doughy in the middle. He's
Yeah.
not supposed to be a champion wrestler, but he was good. He was doing well. And a couple weeks before the district meet, so you're at the end of the season, we saw him beat someone, and it dawned on us, the coaches, that this kid could go to state.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. Okay, so what are we going to do? to get him to be a champion in a way that he didn't know he could be. It never crossed his mind to go to state.
Yeah.
So we told him, Pat, we're gonna be tough on you. The next 2 weeks is gonna be the worst, so that you could go to state. Are you up for it? And he was like, sure.
He's always going to say
Yeah,
sure, right?
Right. This is a kid he's pretty
Yeah,
little,
I can-
and for fun, as a joke, he zipped himself into the coach's duffel bag so that when the coach tried to pick it up, he would pop out in surprise.
Yeah.
Right? Just the goofiest, funniest kid. And so we're a week into this, 2 weeks, and we're putting Pat with older wrestlers, bigger wrestlers,
Yeah.
who are just, you get 10,
Yeah.
15 pounds on
I know.
a little
Makes a
kid.
big difference.
It's going to hurt him.
Force, mass,
And we're at the end of one
acceleration.
of these practices, and me and the head coach are standing there kind of just watching as Pat is wrestling, sweating profusely, right? You heat up the room even. You want it to be hot in there. He's crying. He's like wrestling and crying, but not weeping, but just kind of, you can see the tears flowing as he just keeps pushing himself. And we're not yelling at him, we're not bullying him or anything. And now he gets smacked in the nose. Now he's bleeding. It's like blood, sweat, and tears all in this one moment.
Yeah.
And I'm standing there thinking, I'm doing this to him for his good. It's not chastisement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is. We're pushing him. You could say it was punishing. You would say that. That's an easy thing to say about a wrestling practice. But it's not out of loathing.
Yeah, I don't think the Hebrews 12 is. It is out of it, the whole point is it's my sons whom I love.
Yeah. But
And that's
so
why-
when I think of God, I think of him as that he's watching, saying, okay, we're going to push you because there's more in there, more than you realize. So I've never, it wouldn't even cross my mind, or it hasn't, to think like, oh, he's mad at me in some way. But it automatically crosses my mind to say, oh, this is him bringing out something good.
Yeah, so I would put that in the category of training, and it's painful,
Yeah.
and versus chastisement. Because and so what I'm hearing from you is no. So, and I think that's good, because I've run across people who put the category of chastisement as in over anything difficult, and I think that's a mistake. I think that it's chastisement, which when I say chastisement, I think Hebrews 12 is there's a correction. A father's correcting something with his son
So what
that's
is
gone off.
what is the
But it
error
is out
that's
of
being corrected in Hebrews 12? Do you remember? Like, what is he saying about?
Well, he's not
why they deserve
necessarily
it.
saying in Hebrews 12, he's warning them about leaving. They're wanting to go back to Judaism as a group. It's
Oh,
been
I see.
easier. So the Hebrews 12 passage is not, he's not saying God is chastising them, but he is saying that, I think he's saying, if you do this,
Yeah.
this is can be what happens. And you need to be frightened if you do wrong things and nothing happens from God. Because the ones he loves, he says, no, don't go over there, come back over here.
Right.
And that can have a little pain in it. But what I found to be helpful, so when I got diabetes, I asked the question if it was chastisement, okay? And I've asked it over a couple different periods of my life. And I came to the conclusion, and is that if it's a chastisement for something that you've done wrong, God will let you, it will be plain. You don't have, it's not something to go, you can't layer it over everything. If it is supposed to be a correction, God will let you know what it was for. You don't have to worry about it and go dig it up.
Yeah.
So,
Well, so part of what I think of as the wrath of God or the chastisement, I think they're probably pretty close, is intertwined with sowing and reaping,
okay,
or cause and effect,
okay,
right? Which is really the same idea. So that it's sort of like, you could say it's God's wrath that when I hit myself with a hammer, it hurts. But it's also that I hit myself with a hammer. And that's what I take sowing and reaping to mean, is if you make a mess, you're going to have to clean it up. And God's going to allow that. You can blame God because sometimes you make a mess and he cleans it up. But it doesn't make it less your fault.
yeah.
So is there some circumstance, is there some way that I or Nicole could have been living whereby she doesn't get cancer? To me, that seems like a totally useless, unanswerable question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Because it's not hard for me to say, well, yeah, Could I have been living more deeply for God?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's what it can mean.
It's an easy road to go
I don't
down.
think that's what Hebrews 12 can means, because then it would be, it's not discernible. It's going to be always.
Or it just creates it creates a mode of self-doubt
Yes, I agree.
that's unescapable.
Yeah, I
inescapable.
agree. I agree. So what, how are you, how's Nicole? How do you see, I'm asking you as you though,
How do I see?
how do you think, and again, this is, what's fair to put out there is this is the question in a sense, because I think it's a question people ask, but you have a right to answer. You know,
Well-
it's not an ask to lay out dirty laundry.
No, yeah, and that does make me hesitate a little bit to answer.
Yeah.
It's a totally unknown and unexpected road. She has an aunt who had breast cancer at an even younger age than she is, and has then had it come back, multiple times, and it basically became, okay, this is the rest of her life will be this, it seems. So that weighs heavy on her, Nicole, because you can obviously find tons of examples where women have breast cancer, get it treated, it never comes back, they live a healthy and happy life, sort of with a scar and a remembering of what God did and how they. So it's easy to feel defeated, or not defeated, but like exhausted by the prospect of this might be a forever thing.
Yeah.
That even if she lives through this, which we fully expect her to do.
Yeah.
So that's a heavy.
Yeah.
There's a mourning process.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
To saying the life that I expected and even hoped for and was so happy to walk down, it might be gone.
Yeah.
And so I'm perfectly content that she's going to be in that process for a while. I assume I'll have a similar process,
This is why I don't know if you remember, it was a couple episodes ago when I talked just briefly about mourning as a reflection of love, sorrow.
Yeah, of course.
Because, and the reason I came to that thought and the reason I thought it was valuable is because I'm convinced that as we age and as we grow in what God brings things into our lives, he brings sorrows, and they actually increase, not decrease.
Yeah.
And how do you live with sorrows? How do you live and still have joy? How do you understand the sorrow? How do you live with sorrow when it won't go away?
Right.
And part of what I have come to think is that I realized I was viewing it only as a loss and a negative, which it is a loss and a negative. But then I realized it's also a positive, and it's only that because of the positive.
Right.
And it helped me a lot to realize to live with sorrow and sadness and mourning is a reflection of love, and that encouraged my heart. Otherwise, it threatens to rise up like a tidal wave and blot out the sun, so to speak.
The thing that we talked about early on in these, because when you first get the diagnosis, it's like, whoa, we don't even know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And my first thought was like, man, like the boys need to get married.
I was going to ask you about the kids.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
We got to be grandkid.
Yeah.
We got to be there for those things.
Yeah.
That to me is the immediate huge loss that you begin to think we're going to miss that. And she, I would say I'm really proud of her. She said the other day, I think I just underestimate how great heaven is.
Yeah.
That I would even want to stay here.
I know. I know.
And I said, yeah, they say that the people in heaven they're right here, right? That we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. It's not, they're not looking through a telescope to see us.
Paul has that phrase, and we quote it all the time, but we really don't stop to think about it. To die is gain, to live. It'd be better to be with Christ, but I have a purpose here that God's called me to.
Yeah.
And we quote it and all the time, but we don't sit in it very often. we don't actually choose to go there very often.
Yeah.
And to think and feel it would be better to be there, because all we see is the better here, the things that are good here.
Even Paul, though, he talks about someone in his ministry, I don't remember, was sick, and that he was spared. He personally was spared an immense amount of suffering.
Yeah.
That they were
Yeah.
able to recover.
Yeah.
And I think, okay, just because it's better for Paul to go to heaven,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean it's better for us.
Yeah, that's right.
It's better for Nicole.
That's right. That's right.
But it's a tough road either way.
It is. It's a double-edged sword that cuts either direction. You know, I was talking to Nicole the other day. We invited you guys over for something, and it didn't work out. But part of the conversation was her father, and she didn't say it's the day my dad passed away or died. She called it her dad's heaven day.
Heaven day, yeah.
And I'd never heard anybody say it that way, almost as if what I took from it at the moment was an intentional choice of words to remind myself of what is more true.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was actually clever, and I think those are good things. I think those are strategic things that can actually be helpful to us.
Yeah.
And we just call it when he passed away, let's say, such and such passed away. And it's true, but why not use a phrase that reminds us of another truth?
Right. Yeah.
So when I say that, and then you say, you know, she says, fighting for that for yourself
Yeah.
is difficult.
And you would never need to face those truths if you didn't have these struggles.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's
you just
right.
be content in saying, "Oh, I agree heaven is whatever," you know?
Yeah.
But now you got to look in the box.
So if we
heaven's in
were
the box too.
saying don't waste your cancer, we've talked about a couple things. One, looking in the box.
Yeah.
That when something like this comes, you're forced to look in the box. And that's not bad. Would you say that it would be, there's a trap on either side, one that says don't look in the box, and the other that says just open it up now to be safer than sorry, better safe than sorry? Both those would be false, right?
Right. Yeah.
To peek in the box, then
Well,
put the
or
lid
just to
back
climb
on.
in there.
Yeah, don't climb in.
The
Yeah.
other part is if you look through the pain, if you look through the death, you see God.
Yeah.
But I feel like the temptation is, well, yeah, we're not going to look in there.
Yeah.
Or we're going to look in there but never see God in there.
Yes, that's right.
Right?
Yes.
And so now we're just living in the fear.
Yes. Which is, you know what? That's a difficult one also, because I thought about this when it comes to faith, let's say, or does God exist? The question. You know, God has let a lot of things appear as evidence that aren't. So if you want to conclude that God is bad, there's a lot of evidence out there to say that's what this would argue.
Yeah. Sure.
And you have a choice to say, is that the way I'm going to understand this evidence? Right? Because the reality is, when you look in the box and if you can choose to not see God, as you just said, or you can choose to see God, I could see another person saying, you see God in this? You're living in denial. You're not facing the reality of the loss. You're sugarcoating it over with your spiritual stuff, right? As if you're minimizing the physical reality because you see a spiritual reality. But the opposite's true. The physical becomes more real when we see the spiritual realities that exist behind them.
Well, it's like so the Bible says that the things that are seen are temporary.
Yes. Yeah.
The things that are unseen are eternal.
Yeah.
And so
Temporary
to say,
is not real,
it's not as real.
but it's lesser than.
It's less real. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to say I'm satisfied with the temporary to me seems
Yeah.
silly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So-
like saying I'm going to invest in something that will, I'm going to put all my heart and soul into something that I know will be destroyed in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
I think of I know of a person once who struggled. They had health struggles throughout their life, and I felt like at times that they got manic. And what would happen to them is they'd get so overwhelmed with the difficulty of the struggle they had, and then they would find God, and they would light up, but there was a feeling of offness about it, light up like it was there now, and they'd almost like they died and they don't have to face this world anymore. And that brought them comfort, right? And so they went into the holy spiritual, and this life wasn't even really real anymore.
All right, so that there's something I was thinking about the other day of the difference between the love of a child and the love of an adult. So the love of a child is really pure and innocent and naive. The love of an adult, it has more ways that it could be
Distorted?
yeah, it could maybe it's questionable, you know, maybe it has ulterior motives more often.
Yes.
But it can also it has the potential to be so much deeper,
Yes.
right?
That's right.
Because you know what you're giving.
That's right.
You know what you're turning away from in order to turn to that love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think of that too. I
Yes.
think that people in the midst of struggle and heartache want a childlike naivete.
Mm.
They find or hope to find comfort there.
Yeah.
And instead of
That's a good
accepting
analogy.
God's invitation to go deeper,
Yeah. Adult
say-
love.
to say this is a mature faith,
Yes.
right?
That's
So
a
that
good
Jesus
analogy.
can say, because early in your faith, right? Jesus says, you call me master,
Yeah.
but you've walked with me now, you've suffered with me, and there's more suffering to come. But now, you know my heart, you know my plans, you know where I want to go, and so we can be friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think that's a good point. I've often thought of that same point with, I remember in college, you sit around at a campfire and somebody inevitably brings up, you know, the blaze is burning and our hearts on fire now. And, you know, have they died down? And, you know, there's some point to that. And there's some point in scripture to that in Revelation too. But, as I thought about it, I thought, you know, it becomes an unfair accusation. It's the accusation of youth, because when you get older, things change, and in a fire, actually, the hottest part of a fire is not the flame, but it's the ember. It's much better to pass your hand through a flame than to grab a hold of an ember. The ember's way hotter.
Although they are fun to juggle. You ever hang out with teenagers, you can pull up
Or walk on. Yeah. How are you talking to your kids? You're a dad.
Yeah.
Nicole's a mom.
Checking in with
You can't
them.
stop it from them.
What we talked about, because the hardest things right now are the things that we don't know. And so I was talking to the boys and I said, Mom and I are facing big questions without answers.
Mm-hmm.
But right now our strategy is only to show you what we know. So here's what we've confirmed. Because I don't want them to feel betrayed or left out or surprised.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also don't want them to carry the weight of an unknown that might not even be.
Yeah.
And so therefore giving it to them would be for no purpose.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to tell them about the potentials of how bad things might be that we haven't answered yet.
When you say tell them, you're meaning that's not going to be a point of discussion. That's not what we're going to work through.
So every time
Because
we go to
they
the
know-
doctor,
they
I'm not going
know-
to come home and say, okay, here's what the doctor
Right.
said might be.
That's what I mean by process it with them.
Yeah.
But they know the potential. So
They
it's
do.
not like you're going to, it's not like it's not out there,
No,
but
it's
that's
also,
not what you're going to
I mean,
process.
women getting breast cancer is not rare.
Yeah.
And the survival rate, I mean, stage one, a woman with stage 1 cancer, breast cancer, it's above 90% survival rate.
Yeah.
And that's across age ranges. So you're thinking, well, a lot of older women are way more likely to die when they get breast cancer when you're 85, right? So our survival rate's pretty good. But we don't know with confidence that we're at stage 1. So it's like, okay, well, until we know, we're not going to talk about stage 2 through 4, because why would that help, right? But at the same time, we are talking about it and saying, okay, how are we praying? Let's pray together, bringing them into the conversation, but to the degree they want to. You know, I'm not going to force them to sit in different prayer gatherings that we have, because it doesn't build up their faith either. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're not deep into it either. You know, we're a few weeks into this process, so
Yeah.
we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But when you called and said, here's what we just found out, immediately it's deep,
Yeah.
right? So there's no undeep. what you said is true. You're not deep into the process, but it's also there's no not deep.
Well, what
because
I
of
mean
what
by
it is.
that is, if you talk to Nicole, if you see her in passing, there's nothing different about her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's not 5 weeks into chemo and radiation and hair falling out and
Right.
emaciated. None of that's real.
Right.
So those are going to come with, if assuming
Right.
they do.
Right.
That's going to be where the emotions
I agree.
hit.
Yeah. So I saw her this morning when I came in. I said hello, and I said, "How are you?" And she said, and there's a slight pause, and she said, "I'm doing well." I felt very uncomfortable.
Every "how are you" question is this like,
I
oh,
know.
they're asking how am I? You know what I mean?
I
Versus
know.
the normal how are
I
you?
know it.
Yeah.
And then when she gave her answer, I felt a tremendous sense of I don't know what to say in response to that. Because it's not the moment to poke and dig. It's not even
Yeah.
necessary mine to do that at any point. But to let it go completely can be callous. I mean, it's just a difficult
Right.
thing.
Or do you stop and say something deep and
I
then try to
know.
stir up tears? But then that
I
feels like
know.
you're being selfish in craving this intimate moment that maybe isn't yours.
And then
take.
to be truthful, the whole conversation feels selfish when
Yeah.
you're having it in your head,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's a very, don't waste your cancer also has to do with all the people that are around someone's life.
So the thing I didn't expect, I guess I knew this, but I didn't understand it in this context, is that we're craving normal.
Mm,
So we watched a silly movie last night,
mm.
and we got done, and she was like, "Oh, we just forgot about all this stuff
Yeah.
for a couple hours. That was nice, you know."
Yes.
And so to see someone be
Yes.
like, "Hey, how are you? How are
Yes.
things?" and have it be normal,
Yeah.
in where we're at is kind of a relief,
Yeah.
you know. So you're not having to pause and weigh emotions again.
Man, I was going through a difficult thing a few years ago, and I remember several times waking up in the morning and feeling refreshed, and then having this foreboding sense. Wait a minute, something's not right. Oh yeah, this is going on. I
Mhm.
forgot about that.
Right.
And then that comes in. Oh yeah, this is what life is right now. I just forgot for a second
Yeah. Yeah.
after waking up.
It was a nice couple seconds.
It is.
I think
It
there's something
is.
too about the body remembers. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
I think that's too, trauma is in the body as much as it is
Yeah.
anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's when your body learns to fear
Well,
what's to come.
If I'm going to mention a book, which is off topic, but just on what you just said, such an excellent book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, okay. It's so good.
Yeah.
One of the few health books I read from cover to cover. And but it's how trauma is stored and all the physically in the body, in the muscles, in
Yeah.
different parts of the body, and different kinds of trauma in different places. So interesting. We just can't get at who we are as people. The spiritual and physical. We're so messed up. I think the fall has made everything a muck, and it's like a fishing pole that is got all snarled up, and it's almost untangable. You know, you can't disentangle it, but you still got to fish, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you still got to live.
Well, we're at over an hour. We're at an hour and
Are we?
13. Yeah. So I'm going to say thanks for listening. You know, if you're going through something like this, we appreciate you guys being part of it. Hopefully it helps. Yeah, share this with people who need it. We'll be back next week with a normal conversation, maybe some updates, but we'll have to talk about Trump and DeSantis at some point and all the other things. But
And
Yeah.
yet, let me add this to your close. When you said
Okay.
a normal, I agree. And yet, at the same time, part of what we're saying is that whether you watch it, I watch you, you're in the middle of it. The reality is that God brings us in because normal also isn't normal. There's a spiritual dimension to life that is more normal than this normal,
yeah,
that He wants us to be living more engaged with, aware of. He wants to be overshadowing our normal more frequently. Is that fair?
yeah,
And He uses good things and bad things just so that not to take us out of this life, because there is a normal to this life. You're right. What you said is exactly right. And yet it's also, there's another right
that this is more important and this is more normal than the things we might talk about next time.
Yeah, I don't know if it's normal, but it's good.
Well, it forces us into topics and areas of thought and ideas and what's real that are beneficial.
Yeah.
So
All right.
Okay, we'll close it down.
Till next time.